This is the Tree of Life, Season 24, Chapter 5. In this episode, we will be talking about consensus shifting. The main issue in this episode is what distinguishes a substitution event leading to infinite recursion from an ordinary thought which is negated. In the last episode, we talked about how the context length, describing the distance between two substitutionary impulses within an analog structure, in some way determines whether infinite recursion occurs. The idea was that the end result of a substitution event is consensus. But there are two forms of consensus in this line of thought. First, there is a consensus which is not altered by the negation, that is, the consensus doesn't shift. And two, there is a consensus which shifts, the common result of infinite recursion. Let me explain what I mean. Ordinarily, the reason the average person doesn't experience infinite recursion, or remember supraspatial edges, the reason we don't perceive the tautological flow of consciousness from vessel to vessel, or the weak phase linking which terminates a sequential substitution event, is because the number of steps between any given thought and consensus is kept to one. This means, for example, that consensus, being the conventional assertion of what can be said about what is true, is stable. Any thought that the average person has which leads to negation has only one dialectical step toward consensus. That is, there is a single layer between their mind and the minds of others. This single layer is represented by a single dialectical shift between any thought they negate and the consensus. This single layer describing a single dialectical impulse means that any thought they have which defies conventionality is followed immediately upon inception by a contradictory impulse. This is ensured by the maintenance of a context length between any two substitutionary impulses within an analog structure, by hierarchical natural law as explained in the last episode. Now, what happens in infinite recursion? When the number of steps between any impulse and consensus becomes more than two steps, represented by a longer context length, the result is a substitution event. The reason for this is that doubling permits a second negation, and then a third and a fourth negation, and so on and so forth. Each negation flows from the initial impulse, along a linear path. In a substitution event, the context length is stretched. The distance between the two exclusionary structures in a sequential substitution event is of a critical significance. Now, we also see that in infinite recursion, within a substitution event, there is a causal reordering at the conclusion of that event. In that, within time parsimony, that is, outside that substitution event, it is as if all those paths have actually happened, their impact incorporated into the history of an observer from outside. Thus, it is fair to say that it is the consensus which shifts in infinite recursion. Finally, since we see that the weak phase linking which terminates a substitution event, whether manifesting as authority, reconciliation, or force, always produces a phase flip within an affirmational or negational bodily rhythm. Thus, it may be that the doubling represented by 2 times the context length of an ordinary thought, the two-step dialectical process, ultimately stops when it runs into an existing rhythm. Thus, substitution events end in the flipping of the urinary cycle, or the digestive cycle, or the sexual cycle, or the sleep cycle. From this we can see that it is not enough to negate to create a substitution event and infinite recursion. There must also be a greater than 2-step dialectical process between any negated thought and consensus. This 2-step rule determines whether that negation ultimately causes a shift in the consensus reality to compensate. That's the end of the podcast for today.